Good deal. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. All right. For those that have their camera on, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Pretty please. Thank you. Awesome. All right. Good deal. Thank you all so much again for joining today. My name is Gabryella Desporte, and let's just get right into it. This does come with a little bit of a content warning. We will be discussing a little bit about racialized violence against Black students, the school to prison pipeline, as well as disability violence, as those are integrated within some of the topics that we're going to be discussing today. So a little bit about me. This will be super quick. So I also went to school here. I got my bachelor's in Latin American studies and I minored in sociology, hook 'em. And I come from a STEM education nonprofit background. So I was previously at an organization called Latinitas where I showed girls how to code and use VR. It was super awesome. Some things that I'm interested in include hacktivism, border and migration studies, LGBT and transgender and gender nonconforming people rights, as well as cybersecurity and surveillance ethics. In this little bit of free time that I do have, I enjoy gaming and streaming with my friends on Twitch, building cool things and drawing and painting. These are all just very relevant things that I just wanted to share with y'all. And before we get started, I kind of want to disrupt some of the maybe tensions that we're kind of holding as we're kind of in the Zoom session today. So I would like for y'all to use the chat function if you'd like. Just answer one of the following questions. So either what does self-care mean to you? What is one self-care strategy that you like to use for yourself? Or what's one thing that you're looking forward to this weekend? So pick a question that resonates with you and just type it in the chat. I'll try and look along as we just kind of do our presentation, but I would love to hear from y'all just to kind of just bring things down a little bit, make things a little bit less tense. So pick a question, let it ruminate, and please share it in the chat if you feel so inclined. And as y'all are doing that, we'll go ahead and get started. I know we don't have a lot of time today, so here's how today's going to go down. So I have 3 different sections. So defining Zoom fatigue, self-care or lack thereof in the age of COVID-19, as well as privacy concerns and complex intimacies. And then we're going to be wrapping up with just some kind of like closing final thoughts within all of these topics within the program. So defining Zoom fatigue, you might have seen this before. So what is Zoom fatigue? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. Thinking about the loss of productivity due to too much screen time that leads to burnout. Thinking about those 2 very big keywords here. Some potential reasons why. These include blue light messing with our sleep cycles and our circadian rhythms. For myself, also, this is super relevant to me, learning how to do work from home or online school for people who have never done work from home or online school. And then also bringing school and work home. So kind of creating these tense boundary issues with things that we associated with going to a different location to engage in these certain activities. And so one of the big questions that I kind of had was, why the big focus on labor? Living in a capitalistic society is encouraging of us of longer days that seep into our personal lives. It's very hard to turn off our brains sometimes whenever we have our email in front of us, for example, or we have different tasks and we know we have to take care of them, right? And so some current initiatives that I've kind of seen float around now that we're about a year into the pandemic include Zoom meetups and workshops and check-ins, but at what cost? Because sometimes there does feel like there is something missing there. So a big question that I had was, can self-care practices actually happen within virtual Zoom meetings? And can we establish these kind of boundaries, right? I don't think so. And I'll talk about why. Oops. There we go. So for example, this is just something that I saw immediately whenever I was looking up Zoom and productivity. There's kind of 2 schools of thought that are kind of happening. This is like immediately as soon as I entered Google search. So Zoom hacks for more productive video meetings. The solution to Zoom burnout is fewer calls and more doing this and that, right? Zoom tips, things to make things better. So there's kind of this disparity between completely ditching Zoom altogether. A lot of people don't like it, myself included, but also there's this kind of separate emphasis on how can we be more productive in Zoom. Is that possible? What does productivity look like in an age of a pandemic where we have to use this online um, like telecommunication system to be able to talk to each other, right? This is something I just wanted to point out. And thinking about self-care specifically, the emphasis of self-care from Zoom fatigue is focused on the individual. So there are tons and tons of articles that focus on just exercising, taking breaks from the platform, or also using Zoom to connect with loved ones, in addition to like using Zoom for work and school and things like that. What's missing? I think it's collective community care in this instance. So there are strategies like the 20-20-20 rule, which basically means you look away from your computer and you look at something that's 20 feet away for 20 seconds. That's supposed to help with eye strain. Also using blue light glasses to reduce eye strain as well. Although there isn't a lot of scientific support that really talks about this, but these are some strategies that people have kind of outlined. But also too much screen time has the potential to cause lasting side effects, especially on school-age children. Video conferencing doesn't fulfill sensory needs, for example. So there's a lot of, it only engages sight, maybe touch, but you're only looking at your screen and engaging with people. You're not using other senses within like the actual physical spatial environment that you're in for like your classes or things like that. It's harder to take breaks. So constructive mental reflection, which is kind of like the in-between time that happens between activities or in public schools. Like this is the time when students are kind of talking to each other and socializing before they move on to the next lesson or coming back from lunch, for example. So these times to kind of process the information, those times are lost because it's really just a matter of stepping away from your computer. Zoom is a platform that is teacher/lecturer focused. So for example, I am not able to engage with you in the same way that that I could within a physical classroom space, because I could hand out brochures to you, or I could encourage like groups and pockets of people to talk to each other. The emphasis is put on the person that is talking, right? And generally speaking, too much screen time is generally unhealthy for developing brains and can be socially isolating, especially for school children. I think a lot about the students in Austin ISD who are doing school online for the very first time. And there's also a digital inclusion disparity within that as well. And so something that kind of arose from this for me was, what are the consequences of these factors that take place in the Zoom classroom? So it's not even just a matter of the health-wise for the certain consequences that are insinuated for students, but there are other ways in which violence is still perpetuated. And so looking at privacy concerns and complex intimacies. So I say that not only are work from home expectations higher for ourselves, we can still see recreations of the same kinds of racialized violence that we saw in a pre-COVID world. So these are just a few examples. These are pulled from the news. So a 12-year-old Black student had cops called on him for playing with a toy gun during a Zoom session, during a Zoom class. A Georgetown University law professor was caught making racist remarks on Black students, saying that they're all performing at the very bottom and will not exceed their expectations on Zoom. This disparity between Black and Latinx students that can or cannot access technology to connect to the class, redlining, restricting digital access to students. So this is also something coming from a personal place. So whenever I was at my previous nonprofit job, I was a digital inclusion fellow, and Austin ISD at that point, at the onset of quarantine, there weren't enough computers to give to students to participate in classes online. And so something that we were kind of tasked with was, because we had a reserve of computers that we could either give to students or that we could lend for participating in online classes and programs that we had had. And so Black and Latinx students who often live in low-income neighborhoods did not have access to not only the computers, but also Wi-Fi and hotspots to be able to connect to the internet. So there is a broadband disconnect as well for these students who don't have access to computers. And so that became another problem that we had to address, because we were able to give out some hotspots, but they didn't have a reliable computer at home. There's no way to unify that, right? And so another thought that I kind of had as I was thinking about this were, how are these factors compounded with disabled and differently able people? I call to mind Alison Kaper's Feminist Queer Crip, thinking about crip time. So thinking about the extra time and care that we have to give ourselves. I say we, I think just mentally speaking, I do have certain things that kind of keep me from performing in the same way. But thinking about crip time, in conversation with all of this as a concept to talk about the way disabled and differently able people have to take more time to be able to do a lot of things that able-bodied people can or can't do. So something that I found really interesting was from this website that was from the University of Sheffield, crib time and COVID time. COVID time is different than crib time. COVID time is something that was enacted on all of us, regardless of whether or not we liked it. And then also Zoom for deaf and blind students. How accessible are they? Actually, there was another professor that berated a deaf student in the classroom, for example. That happened earlier this year in February. So what do these kind of futures look like if we're still perpetuating violence in the classroom? More privacy concerns. So Zoom also has a demonstrated history of privacy problems, and in a way makes users bring the prison home. There's a great article that kind of talks about COVID-19 and extending surveillance in the panopticon. It's taking this Foucauldian idea of the panopticon, or a system where it's enacting different types of policing for police, or rather like police forces, to see from the outside, or from inside to the outside, to surveil student progress, engagement, digital history. So this constant monitoring of students within the virtual space. And also early quarantine problems, Zoom bombing. So students coming in and like literally disrupting classroom spaces that had access to these classrooms, sending information to Facebook, even if you didn't have a Facebook account, through different encryption methods. Also sending encryption keys to China due to the app's connections with the country, as their CEO is from there. So these very innate privacy concerns that are also brought up with it. And I think a lot about how Black feminism can really supplement and really make us think about these intimate economies that are kind of created. And thinking about Audre Lorde's A Burst of Light, self-care is an act of self-preservation. How can we preserve ourselves in a digital space on Zoom? And how can we think of self-care as a radical act? I think it's just a starting place. Radical space making and new digital self-care. What does this kind of look like? How is this envisioned? Maybe this is an act of refusal. Maybe we need to really reevaluate how we engage with Zoom and what we do with it. And so what's the solution? It's an incomplete answer. I mean, I think that we can look at different ways in which Black feminism specifically talks about how we can enact radical self-care practices into the work that we do. And also, especially as we live in a more and more digital world filled with more screens. That's everything from me. This conversation isn't over yet. Thank you so much again for listening. All of my sources are within each of the individual slides. Here's my email, my LinkedIn page. Please feel free to connect and reach out. And thank you all so much again for your time. I appreciate it.